Savitri has come to this destined place. On page 393, the very first line on page 393, here first she met on the uncertain earth the one for whom her heart had come so far, as might a soul on nature's background limbed stand out for a moment in a house of dream created by the ardent breath of life. So he appeared against the forest verge, inset twixt green relief and golden ray. So Satyavan appeared. We don't know that he is Satyavan yet, but this person appeared against a background of green relief, the forest, trees, leaves. And what did he look like? As if a weapon of the living light, erect and lofty like a spear of God. Erect and lofty like a spear of God, his figure led the splendor of the morn. It looked as if he was the leader of the glory of that morning. His figure led the splendor of the morn, noble and clear as the broad peaceful heavens. A tablet of young wisdom was his brow. Freedom's imperious beauty curved his limbs. The joy of life was on his open face. He was like a wide daybreak of the gods. His head was a youthful rishi's, touched with light. His body was a lover's and a king's. In the magnificent dawning of his force, built like a moving statue of delight, moving statue of delight, he illumined the border of the forest page. Out of the ignorant, eager toil of the years, abandoning man's loud drama, he had come, led by the wisdom of an adverse fate, to meet the ancient mother in her groves. Now, Sri Aurobindo leaves very many hints to suggest that this meeting of Savitri and Satyavan was a conspiracy, as it were, of fate. On page 394, he says, what would have happened if Satyavan, instead of taking this way in the forest, had taken some other way? He would have gone in that direction, and Savitri's chariot would have come this way, and she would not have seen him. This is an accidental meeting. What are the chances of your meeting X? In this country, the population probably at that time was not so dense as it is now, and still on a random chariot journey, what are the chances of your meeting X or Y or Z? So that morning too, Savitri would have missed him. But the poet says on page 394, middle of that page, that day he had turned from his accustomed paths. This was a path he never usually took. He always went and came by some other forest path. This path he normally didn't ever take. That day he had turned from his accustomed paths for one who, knowing every moment's load, can move in all our studied or careless steps. So there is behind the so-called studied steps, oh, I have done it very well planned, or when you say it was all careless, behind each one of these things, there is the guidance, there is the guiding hand for one who, knowing every moment's load, can move in all our studied and careless steps, had laid the spell of destiny on his feet. So his feet were guided were driven by destiny along that particular forest path which he hardly ever took. Why? And drawn him to the forest's flowering verge, so that he would meet Savitri. There is no need for the poet to bring in this, but he emphasizes this point, that Satyavan's coming there was not just a casual coming, although it looked casual, but if you really study it, look at it carefully, you find that this was not the path. There are many pathways in the forest. This was not a pathway Satyavan ever took. But that day, that morning, for some reason, fate compelled him to take that path, and that was where he was. But even then, Savitri had seen so many young people. It's not as if Satyavan was the first young man she saw. She had been traveling for a whole year. How many young people she must have met? Some of them grand looking, very handsome looking, some of them very noble looking, some of them very brave. So she says, you don't fall in love with every handsome face that you see. You see? So Savitri saw him, and she would have just passed on, but somehow destiny again intervened. On page 395, middle of that, about 4 lines from bottom. So might she have passed by on chance ignorant roads, missing the call of heaven, losing its aim, but the God touched in time her conscious soul. Ashwapati had said, your soul will have the wisdom, the knowledge which will guide you to this man. So, the God of love, at the right moment, touched Savitri's soul. But the God touched in time her conscious soul. Because the God of love touched her conscious soul, her vision settled, caught, and all was changed. He would have been another person in her memories bank. You know, like we have so many experiences, we have seen so many people, we have seen so many faces, there's another face. But God of love, at that particular point, touched her soul, and once the God of love had touched her soul, when she looked at him, that was the end. That was the end of a journey. And the poet describes this, same page, about 6 lines from that line. All in a moment was surprised and seized. All in inconscient ecstasy lay enwrapped, or under imagination's colored lids, held up in a large mirror air of dream, broke forth in flame to recreate the world. And in that flame to new things she was born. A mystic tumult from her depths arose. Sri Aurobindo he doesn't only describe philosophic moods, great ideas, but when these elemental passions and emotions come, he takes equal delight in describing those two. For God, there is nothing secular and nothing sacred. Everything is sacred in this world. It's a mistake to call certain things secular and certain other things sacred. Everything in this world is sacred. Even the human love is sacred. So when Sri Aurobindo describes it, he uses the same care, the same love. In the Life Divine, in many of his poems, Sri Aurobindo describes the Creator invests the same skill in fabricating the curl of a young girl as he does in fabricating the stars and the planets and the moon. For the Creator, there is no distance, no difference of quality and quantity. In every act, the same divine's perfection, the same divine's delight. And here too, he now describes how Savitri's heart is filled up. A mystic tumult from her depths arose. Hailed, smitten erect like one who dreamed at ease. And now, because of this beautiful idea, life ran to gaze from every gate of sense. Now, life in Savitri wanted to see Satyavan. So it rushed to every gate of sense. You can see a person, you can hear a person, you can touch a person, they are all various senses. So life now ran as you run when a procession comes, you want to see it, and you want to see it through every window. There are people looking at this procession. Similarly, Savitri's senses, imagine them as so many windows. Every window now focused its attention on Satyavan. So he says, life ran to gaze from every gate of sense, through thoughts indistinct and glad in moon mist heavens. Feelings, what kind of feelings heaved in her heart? Feelings as when a universe takes birth, when a new universe takes birth, swept through the turmoil of her bosom space, invaded by a swarm of golden gods. She felt her heart was invaded not by one god but a swarm of gods. Her heart was invaded by a swarm of gods, invaded by a swarm of golden gods, arising to a hymn of wonder priests. Her soul flung wide its doors to this new sun. The door of her soul was flung wide open to receive this new sun. An alchemy worked, the transmutation came, the missioned face had wrought the master's spell. In the nameless light of two approaching eyes, a swift and fated turning of her days appeared and stretched to a gleam of unknown worlds. Then, trembling with a mystic shock, her heart moved in her breast and cried out like a bird who hears his mate upon a neighboring bough, whose trampling fast, wheels largely stumbling ceased, the chariot stood like an arrested wind. Suddenly Savitri's chariot stood there like wind arrested. Wind that is flows, you arrest the wind. Wind arrested. This is what Savitri felt. What about Satyavan? What did he feel? Well, the poet obliges you. It says, and Satyavan looked out from his soul's doors and felt the enchantment of her liquid voice fill his youth's purple ambience and endured the haunting miracle of a perfect face. He felt the haunting miracle of a perfect face. He felt this is Savitri's face, haunted him like a miracle, haunting miracle of a perfect face. Mastered by the honey of a strange flower mouth, drawn to soul spaces round a brow, he turned to the vision like a sea to the moon. It is the moon who determines high tide and low tide. When the sea sees the moon, there is a high tide. So Satyavan's heart was like a sea attracted by the moon, drawn to soul spaces opening round a brow. He turned to the vision like a sea to the moon and suffered a dream of beauty and of change, discovered the aureole round a mortal's head, adored a new divinity in things. His self-bound nature foundered as in fire. His life was taken into another's life. The splendid, lonely idols of his brain fell prostrate from their bright sufficiencies, as at the touch of a new infinite. To worship a Godhead greater than their own, an unknown imperious force drew him to her. Now, on page 397, this golden figure given to his grasp hid in its breast the key of all his aims, a spell to bring the immortal's bliss on earth, to mate with heaven's truth our mortal thought, to lift earth hearts nearer the eternal sun. In these great spirits now incarnate here, love brought down power out of eternity to make of life his new undying base. Sri Aurobindo has written, as I said, beautifully on meditation, on mantra, on various things. He has also written a beautiful lyric on falling in love. See, I've always felt if Sri Aurobindo had written nothing else, but just this book, book 5 of Savitri, leave alone early Ashwapati's yoga, Savitri's yoga, the dialogue between God of death and Savitri. If he had not written any of these, just written this small book, which is now called book 5, he would have been remembered for all time to come, because nowhere do we find love treated with such tender hands, with such purity. And now you have a little poem on love. Why and how do people fall in love? On page 397, a few lines down what we are reading now. On the dumb bosom of this oblivious globe, although as unknown beings we seem to meet, our lives are not aliens, nor as strangers join, moved to each other by a causeless force. The soul can recognize its answering soul across dividing time, and on life's roads, absorbed, rapt traveler, turning it recovers familiar splendors in an unknown face. You are walking along your own path in life. Suddenly you see a face. You had not planned to see that face. Suddenly you do. And touched by a familiar, and what do you see in that face? Familiar splendors in an unknown face. This face is unknown, but something within you says, I have seen this face somewhere, I don't know where it is. I have met this person somewhere before, I don't know where it is. That's the kind of feeling. Is it a stranger or do I know this person? That's the kind of feeling. And touched by the warning finger of swift love, it thrills again to an immortal joy, wearing a mortal body for delight. He says, there is a power within that knows beyond our knowings. We are greater than our thoughts, and sometimes earth unveils that vision here. And then come these beautiful lines. To live, to love are signs of infinite things. Love is a glory from eternity's spheres. Abased, disfigured, mocked by baser mights that steal his name and shape and ecstasy, he is still the Godhead by which all can change. He says, to live and to love are signs of infinite things. It's not a small thing to live and to love, because love is a glory that comes from eternity's spheres. But very often, most often, when it manifests itself here on our earth, in what form does it come? Abased, disfigured. It comes perverted, disfigured, made ugly by baser mites, mocked by baser mites that steal his name. They still call this thing love, and shape and ecstasy. In whatever form it comes, it has this ecstasy. However much we might have spoiled love in our human lives, he says, he is still the Godhead by which all can change. The only Godhead in human lives, with the help of which everything can be changed, this world can be changed, that is love. It's a glory that comes from the higher spheres. And when the love comes, a mystery wakes in our inconscient stuff. A bliss is born that can remake our life. Love dwells in us like an unopened flower, awaiting a rapid moment of the soul, or he roams in a charmed sleep mid thoughts and things. The child God is at play. He seeks himself in many hearts and minds and living forms. He lingers for a sign that he can know. And when it comes, wakes blindly to a voice, a look, a touch, the meaning of a face. This love is kindled very often by one look, sometimes by a touch, sometimes when you wonder about the meaning of a face. His instrument, the dim corporeal mind of celestial insight, now forgetful grown, he seizes on some sign of outward charm. A few lines down later, love's adoration, like a mystic seer, through vision looks at the invisible, in earth's alphabet finds a godlike sense. But the mind only thinks, behold the one for whom my life has waited long unfilled. Behold the sudden sovereign of my days. Heart feels for heart, limb cries for answering limb. All strives to enforce the unity all is. Too far from the divine, love seeks his truth, and life is blind, and the instruments deceive, and powers are there that labor to debase. Still can the vision come, the joy arrive. So he's talked about this glorious love, but the poet also says in the last 4 lines, rare is the cup fit for love's nectar wine. Rare is that cup, only rare hearts can hold this nectar wine. Rare is the cup fit for love's nectar wine. As rare the vessel that can hold God's birth. A soul made ready through 1,000 years is the living mold of a supreme descent. Just as for God to descend in any human being, that human being has to be an exceptional tapasya. So, only those who are capable of exceptional tapasya can receive this God's gift called love. So love is a glorious thing, true, but it doesn't come to man easily. It can only come, as he says, rare is the cup for love's nectar wine, as rare the vessel that can hold God's birth. Now, this long passage that we read, Sri Aurobindo talks about how strangers meet and for no reason, no rhyme at all, they fall in love and their life is changed. All these things can happen. And then he says, love is that tremendous thing, and love is not only love between man and woman, but love in all forms is a direct gift from the divine, and only those who have exceptional purity in heart can receive love. Earlier on in Canto 2, when he was describing Savitri, he describes her as a rare vessel who could hold the God of love. Because when the God of love wants to occupy human heart, he finds she had no place in human heart. Why? Because the human heart is already occupied by the ego. It's only the egoless heart that can love. So if you want real love to be born, it can't coexist with ego. Ego and love can't coexist. Love dies of suffocation when your heart is dominated by ego. That's why he's saying, rare is the cup fit for love's nectar wine, as rare the vessel that can hold God's birth. Well, Savitri yet hasn't spoken to Satyavan. Satyavan hasn't spoken to Savitri. They've only looked at each other and a sea change has come over them. Satyavan had changed, Savitri had changed. Now, in the next canto, Satyavan and Savitri, we have a dialogue between Satyavan and Savitri. They get introduced to each other. This is a wonderful, wonderful passage, and I don't know how much of this will be able to read. On second thoughts, I think we'll stop here. Because this nectar wine of love has been too heady.